Hollow Hill was the kind of place people passed through, not a destination but a stop on the way to somewhere else. The small mining town, nestled in a valley shadowed by towering hills, carried an air of quiet desperation. Its buildings, weathered and leaning with age, seemed to mirror the weariness of the townsfolk who remained. To an outsider like Claire Dawson, it looked like a town caught in time, slowly crumbling under the weight of its secrets. Claire parked her car outside the Hollow Hill General Store, the only business still operating on the main street. She adjusted her bag, stuffed with notebooks, a camera, and a recorder, before stepping inside. The bell above the door jingled, and every conversation in the small space ceased. Heads turned toward her, eyes narrowing with suspicion. "Morning," Claire said, forcing a smile. "I'm looking for someone who can tell me about the mines." An old man behind the counter grunted, his leathery face set in a scowl. "Nothing to tell," he muttered. "Mine's been closed for years. Dangerous place." "I've heard that," Claire replied, pulling out her notebook. "I'm a journalist, investigating the disappearances. I think there's a story here that people need to know." A sharp laugh came from a man sitting by the window. "People need to know? Lady, what they need is to stay far away from this place. Write your story, print your paper, but don't think for a second that you're welcome here." Claire's smile faltered, but she wasn't easily deterred. "Why do people think the mines are cursed?" she asked. "What do you know about the Keeper?" The room grew colder, the tension palpable. The old man behind the counter shot the younger man a glare, then turned his attention back to Claire. "You're better off leaving," he said firmly. "Nothing good ever came out of those mines. And nothing good ever will." Undeterred, Claire paid for a bottle of water and left. She could feel their eyes on her as she walked to her car, but she had what she needed, confirmation that the townsfolk knew something. Whatever the truth was, it was buried in the mines, and Claire intended to dig it up. The entrance to the Hollow Hill mines loomed like a gaping mouth, its rusted gates chained shut. Claire's heart raced as she approached, the weight of her decision pressing heavily on her chest. She had bribed a local handyman to unlock the gate for her under the cover of night, promising him a significant sum of money. He'd taken the cash and vanished without a word, leaving her alone. The air inside the mine was damp and suffocating, the only sound the crunch of her boots on gravel. Claire switched on her flashlight, the beam slicing through the darkness to reveal jagged walls and abandoned equipment. The deeper she ventured, the more oppressive the atmosphere became. She felt as though she were being watched, the shadows seeming to shift just beyond the edge of her light. She found the first clue deep within a collapsed shaft, a leather-bound journal, its pages yellowed with age. The entries, written by a miner named Samuel Hargrove, described a secret operation conducted by the Hollow Hill Mining Company. They had discovered something ancient, something they weren't meant to find. Samuel's final entry sent chills down Claire's spine. "We shouldn't have gone so deep. There's something here, something alive. It's watching us. It won't let us leave." The journal led her to an area marked with crude symbols carved into the rock. The carvings depicted a monstrous figure with elongated limbs and hollow eyes, surrounded by kneeling figures. In the center of the chamber was an altar, its surface stained dark. Scattered around it were remnants of bones and tools, as though some ritual had been attempted here long ago. As Claire examined the altar, her flashlight flickered, plunging her into darkness. A low, guttural sound echoed through the tunnels, sending a bolt of terror through her. She fumbled with the flashlight, finally managing to turn it back on. The shadows seemed to close in around her, and she realized she was no longer alone. The Keeper emerged from the darkness, its form barely human. Its elongated limbs moved with a grotesque grace, and its hollow eyes glowed faintly. Claire froze, unable to tear her gaze away from the creature. It let out a bone-chilling screech, and she turned and ran, the sound of its pursuit echoing in her ears. She stumbled through the tunnels, her mind racing. She had to find a way to escape, to stop the creature. Her eyes fell on the altar, and she remembered the journal's mention of a ritual. The miners had tried to bind the creature, to trap it within the hill. But they had failed. Claire realized that if she didn't complete the ritual, the Keeper would claim her. Using the carvings as a guide, She pieced together the steps of the ritual. It required blood, fire, and an offering of something deeply personal. Claire hesitated, her hands shaking as she searched her bag. She found a locket her mother had given her, the only keepsake she had left. Her chest tightened, but she knew there was no other choice. She placed the locket on the altar and pricked her finger with a jagged rock, letting a drop of blood fall onto the surface. The air grew colder, the keeper's screeches growing louder as it approached. Claire lit a match, holding her breath as she set the locket aflame. The flames roared to life, consuming the offering as the altar began to glow. The keeper lunged at her, but the ritual's power surged through the chamber. A blinding light erupted from the altar, and the creature let out a final, agonized wail before vanishing into the void. The ground beneath Claire trembled, and she barely managed to scramble to safety as the tunnel began to collapse. She emerged into the night, covered in dirt and shaking with exhaustion. The mine's entrance caved in behind her, sealing the horrors within. Claire stared at the hill, the weight of what she had witnessed settling heavily on her shoulders. The keeper was gone, but the scars it had left would never fade. Returning to the town, Claire tried to share her story, but the townsfolk refused to listen. They wanted to forget, to pretend the mines held no secrets. Defeated, Claire left Hollow Hill, vowing to expose the truth in her writing. But deep down, she knew the hill's darkness would never truly be gone. Years later, Claire's article would spark curiosity in those who read it. Some would dismiss it as fiction, but others would feel the pull of Hollow Hill, drawn to its mystery. And the hill, patient and eternal, would wait for them, its keeper stirring once more in the shadows. Claire's life changed irrevocably after Hollow Hill. The experience left her with a mix of trauma and determination. She moved to the city, seeking refuge in the noise and anonymity it offered, but the memories of the hill haunted her nights. Her dreams were plagued with the keeper's hollow eyes and the wails that echoed through the collapsing tunnels. The article she wrote became a sensation, drawing the attention of conspiracy theorists, paranormal enthusiasts, and skeptics alike. Some hailed her as a courageous journalist uncovering hidden truths. Others accused her of fabricating a sensational story for fame. The scrutiny only deepened her isolation, as Claire found herself caught between wanting to warn others and fearing they might suffer the same fate she narrowly escaped. But Hollow Hill was not done with her. Months after the article's publication, Claire received an anonymous package. Inside was an old, rusted lantern, one she recognized from the mines. Attached to it was a note scrawled in jagged handwriting, "It's still waiting." Her blood ran cold. The thought that someone else had ventured into the mines, or worse, that the keeper had found a way to reach her, sent her into a spiral of paranoia. She changed her locks, installed cameras, and avoided anyone she didn't trust completely. Despite her fear, a part of her felt drawn back to Hollow Hill. Questions lingered in her mind. What exactly was the keeper? Was it truly gone, or had she merely delayed the inevitable? Against her better judgment, Claire began researching ancient rituals and folklore, hoping to find answers that could put her mind at ease. The deeper she delved, the more she realized how little she understood about what she had encountered. One rainy evening, Claire's phone buzzed with a message from an unknown number. It contained a single image, the collapsed mine entrance, now cleared of rubble. Beneath it was a caption, "You left something unfinished." Panic gripped her, but alongside it came a grim resolve. Claire knew she couldn't run forever. If the hill wanted her, she would have to face it, on her terms. Armed with her research, she returned to Hollow Hill, this time prepared for whatever awaited her. The town was even emptier than before, its streets silent and desolate. The general store was boarded up, and the few remaining residents avoided her gaze. The mine entrance loomed ahead, its gaping maw inviting her back into the darkness. With a deep breath, Claire stepped inside. The air was colder than she remembered, and the oppressive weight of the hill seemed to press down on her. As she navigated the familiar tunnels, she noticed new carvings on the walls, symbols that hadn't been there before. They pulsed faintly, as though alive, and the deeper she went, the more they seemed to glow. In the chamber with the altar, the scene was eerily unchanged. The remnants of her previous offering lay scattered, but the air was thick with a new energy. Claire set down her bag, pulling out the tools she had brought, candles, a ceremonial dagger, and a vial of salt water. She didn't know if her research would work, but it was all she had. As she began the ritual, the ground trembled, and the keeper emerged from the shadows once more. Its form was more defined this time, its hollow eyes burning with rage. Claire's hands shook, but she forced herself to continue, chanting the incantation she had memorized. The creature screeched, lunging at her, but a barrier of light erupted around the altar, holding it at bay. The ritual demanded a final act, an offering of her deepest fear. Claire closed her eyes, letting the memories she had buried rise to the surface. She saw herself as a child, cowering in the dark as her parents fought in the next room. She felt the weight of loneliness, the fear of failure that had driven her to Hollow Hill in the first place. Tears streamed down her face as she poured those emotions into the ritual, her voice breaking but unyielding. The keeper let out an ear-splitting wail as the light from the altar engulfed it. The ground shook violently, and Claire was thrown back as the chamber collapsed around her. Crawling through the rubble, she found her way to the surface just as the first rays of dawn broke over the hill. The mine entrance was gone, buried under tons of earth. Claire stood there, bruised and battered, but alive. For the first time in months, she felt a sense of peace. Whatever the keeper had been, it was gone now, truly gone. As she drove away from Hollow Hill, Claire couldn't help but glance in the rearview mirror. The hill stood silent and still, its secrets buried once more. But deep down, she knew that some places are never truly at rest, and some shadows never stop watching.